January 2020. Federal agents approach a house in Celebration, Florida. A town built by Disney. Where every street looks perfect. Where nothing bad is supposed to happen. The man who answers the door is shaking. He won't make eye contact. He says his wife is sleeping. He says his kids are at a friend's house. But the officers smell something. Something unmistakable. What they find upstairs will become one of the most disturbing family annihilations in Florida history. And the question that haunts everyone who hears this story. How long had he been living with them? This is the story of the Todt family. Anthony Todt was 46 years old. A physical therapist. A soccer coach. A father of 3. His wife, Megan, was 42. She homeschooled their children. Alec was 13. Tyler was 11. Zoe was 4. From the outside, they had everything. A beautiful home in one of America's most sought-after communities. But beneath the surface, cracks had been forming for years. Financial fraud. Mounting debt. An eviction notice on the door. And then, silence. Complete silence. For weeks. Celebration, Florida is not like other towns. It was designed by Disney in the 1990s. Wide sidewalks. Pristine lawns. Homes that look like postcards. It's minutes from Disney World. Residents describe it as living in a fairy tale. The Todt family moved there in 2017. Megan devoted herself entirely to the children. She homeschooled all 3. Every single day. Friends described her as nurturing. Organized. Deeply involved. Little Zoe was curious. Always asking questions. Always exploring. Tyler loved reading. He played piano. Alec was thoughtful. Mature for his age. The kind of kid who took things seriously. Anthony worked as a physical therapist. He traveled to Connecticut during the week. He maintained a practice there. But on weekends, he came home. He coached youth soccer. Neighbors saw him as friendly. Engaged. Devoted. The family seemed happy. Well-dressed. Always polite. Living comfortably in paradise. But appearances can be deceiving. By 2019, Anthony Todt's life was unraveling. Federal investigators were looking into his physical therapy practice in Connecticut. What they discovered was systematic fraud. He had been billing Medicaid for treatments that never happened. Billing insurance companies for patients who never came in. The money had been funding their lifestyle. The house in Celebration. The trips to Disney World. The homeschooling materials. All of it built on lies. Anthony had also taken out high-interest loans. Borrowed from firms in New York City. When he couldn't repay, lawsuits were filed. By late 2019, he owed nearly $200,000. The pressure was crushing. The family began missing rent payments. In December 2019, an eviction notice appeared on their door. Around this time, Anthony sent a message to Megan's family. He told them they were going on an extended holiday. They wouldn't be in contact for a while. At first, no one questioned it. The family traveled often. But Christmas came and went. No word from Megan. No calls. No texts. No photos of the kids. Megan never missed Christmas. She loved the holidays. Her family grew worried. They called constantly. Texted. Nothing. A neighbor reached out to Megan directly. She received a brief reply. Strange. Not like Megan at all. Something was very wrong. Megan's relatives contacted authorities. They requested a wellness check. They explained the family had been unreachable for weeks. But police didn't act immediately. No signs of danger. No reports of violence. Technically, the family was free to travel. Then in early January 2020, The FBI agent investigating Anthony's fraud grew concerned. He couldn't reach Anthony either. Phone calls went unanswered. Emails bounced back. The agent contacted the Osceola County Sheriff's Office. He urged them to locate Anthony Todt. This time, authorities took it seriously. On January 13, 2020, federal agents and deputies arrived at the house. They came to execute an arrest warrant for the fraud charges. They rang the doorbell. After a long pause, Anthony answered. He was shaking. His clothes disheveled. When officers asked where his wife and children were, he mumbled about a sleepover. He said Megan was sleeping upstairs. But his body language told a different story. His trembling hands. The way he avoided eye contact. Everything about him set off alarm bells. The officers decided to search the home. The moment they stepped inside, they were hit with an overpowering odor. The unmistakable smell of decomposition. They climbed the stairs to the master bedroom. What they found was beyond comprehension. Megan, Alec, Tyler, and Zoe. All dead. Their bodies wrapped in blankets. The family dog, Breezy, was also deceased. The state of decomposition indicated they had been dead for weeks. Possibly since late December. The medical examiner arrived at the scene. What they discovered was methodical. Calculated. All 4 family members had dangerously high levels of Benadryl in their systems. Empty bottles were scattered throughout the house. On nightstands. Bathroom counters. Kitchen surfaces. Toxicology reports showed levels far exceeding any therapeutic dose. This was deliberate poisoning. The medication had been used to sedate the victims. Forensic analysis revealed more. Except for little Zoe, each victim had suffered multiple stab wounds. But here's the crucial detail. The wounds were likely inflicted after death. This suggested staging. An attempt to create a specific narrative. The actual causes of death involved drugging and suffocation. Though advanced decomposition made some determinations challenging. Investigators collected weapons. Processed them for fingerprints and DNA. Documented their locations. They examined bedding, clothing, personal items. They analyzed residue patterns. Every piece of evidence was catalogued. One detail emerged that broke everyone's hearts. Alec was found clutching rosary beads. In his hand. A young man seeking comfort. Holding something sacred as his world ended. The beads remained in his fingers long after he passed. There were signs of struggle. Investigators noted a scratch on Anthony's neck. Blisters and cuts on his hands. Defensive wounds. Someone had fought back. Someone had tried to survive. The forensic team analyzed the timeline. Based on decomposition rates. Temperature records. The last known communications. They determined the deaths likely occurred in late December. Right around the time Anthony had told Megan's family they were going on holiday. The final text messages from Megan's phone were examined. Brief. Uncharacteristic. Investigators believed Anthony had sent them himself. Creating the illusion his wife was still alive. And then there was Anthony. According to evidence and witness statements, he had been living in that house with those bodies. For approximately 3 weeks. Neighbors reported seeing him leave occasionally. To buy alcohol. To buy food at nearby stores. One neighbor saw him take out the trash. Another recalled a brief conversation. Anthony seemed distracted. Disheveled. But offered no explanation. He had turned off his phone. Cut off communication with everyone. Family. Friends. Federal investigators. He simply existed in that home. Moving through the downstairs rooms. While his entire family remained upstairs. Their bodies slowly decomposing in the Florida heat. Despite the air conditioning, he kept running. Anthony Todt was the only suspect. The only living person in that house. When detectives questioned him, his story was both bizarre and chilling. He claimed Megan had become obsessed with apocalyptic beliefs. She was convinced the world was ending. He said she had chronic health issues. Lyme disease. Liver problems. Constant pain. According to Anthony, Megan believed the family should leave this world together to avoid suffering. He described how they had allegedly discussed this plan. How Megan had explained everything to their sons, preparing them. But when asked how he killed his family, his confession was disturbing. He described suffocating Zoe, putting his hand over her mouth, a pillow over her face, holding it until there was no motion left, then moving to Alex's room. He said they stood there, just staring at each other, gaining confidence. He stabbed him. Alex started kicking, trying to get up. Anthony reached around and covered his nose and mouth. He even described killing the family dog, holding her snout and nose closed. Anthony then claimed Megan had harmed herself, but didn't pass. That she begged him to help her. He said he suffocated her with a pillow. Even as he confessed, Anthony insisted he had tried to harm himself multiple times, using knives, zip ties around his neck, large amounts of Benadryl, but couldn't go through with it. The entire interview was bone-chilling. He described the murders effortlessly, without showing even the slightest hint of remorse. He said he would take full responsibility, simply because he wanted it done. An attitude that was nothing short of infuriating. Weeks later, Anthony's story changed completely. In a handwritten letter to his father, he now claimed Megan was responsible for everything. He alleged she had drugged the children, spiked their pudding with Benadryl, then stabbed them. When he confronted her, he said she harmed herself. He claimed he was simply a witness to a tragedy he couldn't stop. This new version contradicted everything he had told detectives. He now maintained his innocence, said he had provided for his wife, done everything for his family, that Megan was progressively sick, that he devoted himself to caring for her, flying back and forth to Connecticut, sacrificing his own health. But for investigators, it didn't matter which story was true. The forensic evidence was clear. Anthony Todt had murdered his family. Anthony Todt's trial began in April 2022, more than 2 years after his arrest. The courtroom in Osceola County was packed. Media, members of Megan's family, community members who had followed the case. Over 6 days, prosecutors methodically built their case. They presented Anthony's detailed confessions, captured on video, forensic reports showing Benadryl toxicity and stab wounds, crime scene photographs, the undeniable fact that he had lived with the bodies for weeks, without calling for help. Lead prosecutor walked the jury through a timeline. Phone records showed Anthony had been the last person to send messages from Megan's phone. Receipts proved he had been purchasing alcohol and food, while his family lay deceased upstairs. Empty Benadryl bottles found throughout the home. Medical examiners testified about their findings. Toxicology results. The nature of the wounds. Digital forensic experts presented evidence from Anthony's computer and phone. Searches he had made in the weeks leading up to the murders. Neighbors took the stand, describing Anthony's strange behavior. How he had been seen leaving the house, appearing disheveled, offering no explanation for his family's absence. Anthony's defense team faced an uphill battle. They tried to suppress his initial confessions, argued he was in severe emotional distress, not thinking clearly. They claimed the interrogation had been coercive, that Anthony had been manipulated into false statements. They attempted to argue the bodies were too decomposed to conclusively determine cause of death, suggesting reasonable doubt existed. But the prosecution countered with devastating questions. If Megan was truly responsible, why didn't he call police immediately? Why didn't he intervene to save his children? Why did he stay in that house for weeks? Living among the remains of his family? Buying groceries and alcohol as if nothing had happened? Why did he turn off his phone? Avoid all contact with the outside world? And perhaps most damning of all, why did his story change so dramatically? The defense had no satisfactory answers. Anthony took the stand, attempting to explain his actions. But his testimony only reinforced the inconsistencies. He appeared detached, struggled to maintain eye contact with jurors. When pressed about specific details, his answers contradicted earlier statements. The jury deliberated for just 6 hours. On April 14, 2022, Anthony Todt was found guilty. 4 counts of first-degree murder. 1 count of animal cruelty for the death of Breezy. As the verdict was read, Anthony stood motionless, showing little visible emotion. The judge sentenced him to 4 consecutive life sentences, without the possibility of parole, plus an additional year for animal cruelty. The consecutive nature meant even if 1 conviction were overturned, Anthony would still spend the rest of his life behind bars. Anthony Todt is currently incarcerated, serving 4 life sentences. He will never be released. His father criticized the verdict, argued the confession shouldn't have been trusted. But for the community of Celebration, for Megan's family, for everyone who followed this case, the verdict represented justice. The Disney town that prided itself on perfection, on being a fairy tale community, had been shaken to its core. The image of the perfect family, living in the perfect town, had been shattered forever. What truly drove Anthony Todt to annihilate his entire family? Was it the financial pressure? The fraud investigation closing in? The eviction notice? Or was it something deeper? Some have pointed to his childhood trauma. In 1980, when Anthony was just 4 years old, someone broke into his family's home in Pennsylvania, shot his mother, Loretta. She survived but lost her left eye. Anthony's father was later charged with attempting to hire someone to carry out the shooting. He was convicted, served time in prison, though he has always maintained his innocence. Anthony's sister reflected on how that trauma might have affected her brother. But she was clear. Trauma could never excuse what he did. Beyond the trauma, there was the fraud, the mounting debt, the lawsuits. His entire life built on deception. When it all came crashing down, he saw no way out. Except one. But here's what haunts investigators. Anthony had options. He could have declared bankruptcy, left Florida, started over. Instead, he chose to take 4 innocent lives. His wife who trusted him, his children who depended on him, even the family dog. And then he lived with their bodies. 4 weeks. Moving through that house, as if frozen in time. Unable to face what he had done. Unable to escape it. The Todt family murders remind us of something unsettling. That evil doesn't always announce itself. It doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes it looks like a soccer coach, a physical therapist, a father who tucks his kids in at night. Megan Todt devoted her life to her children. Every day, she taught them, nurtured them, loved them. Alec was on the verge of becoming a young man. Thoughtful, mature, seeking comfort in his final moments with rosary beads in his hand. Tyler had his whole life ahead of him. Piano lessons, books to read, dreams to pursue. And little Zoe, 4 years old, curious, full of questions, full of life. Their story ended in that house in Celebration. A town designed to be perfect, where nothing bad was supposed to happen. But it did. And the man responsible will spend the